For those of you who don't know me, again, my name is Mark Mellon. I've been here on staff at the church for almost 10 years now. So it's been a fun journey. And I'm married to my wife, Bonnie, for the last 15 years. Yeah, there's one person who's excited about that. Thank you. One person. Marriage is a good thing. We got 4 kids. I got an 11-year-old named Connor. I have an 8-year-old named Rebecca. I have a 6-year-old named Jonathan, and I have a 4-year-old named Rachel. My 6-year-old, Jonathan, he's like a mini version of me. He's just like me. He's just like me as a kid, and I now see why my mom beat me as a child. He is wild. He's adventurous. He's impulsive. He's reckless and fearless and courageous. He's got this inflated sense of ego. You know, he thinks he's the toughest kid in every room. In fact, one night at the dinner table, he was looking at his brother Connor, who's twice his size, two belts above him in jiu-jitsu and is in boxing. And he said, "Connor, what you need to know is I'm tougher than you, I'm smarter than you, and I'm better looking than you." Back in April, he wanted to learn how to ride his bike. So we took him up to the Oak Leaf location in the extended parking lot, and I taught him how to ride his bike. In fact, I think we got video of it. Why don't you check this out? Yeah, Johnny set out to ride his bike, got lost a little bit, hit a curb. Isn't that how the way things go? In fact, if you have your Bibles with you, why don't you turn with me to John 18:10-27. We're going to look at a legend in the Bible who got lost along the way, just like Johnny. We're in this series called Legends Never Die. And we're going to look at a guy named Peter. Peter in John 18:10, he's with Jesus, and Jesus is about to be arrested by these Roman soldiers. But to get more context, we got to back up a few hours when they're having dinner, and that's in John chapter 13. Jesus is having dinner with his disciples. It's the Last Supper. It's the last time he's going to eat with them alive. And he's saying all these cryptic things that one of my disciples is going to betray me. And he says, "I'm going to have to go away for a while." And Peter says to him, "Where are you going?" And he says, "Where I'm going, you can't go." And Peter says, "Lord, I'd follow you anywhere. I'd die for you." Peter's a lot like Johnny. You know, he's wild and reckless and impulsive. He's super loyal. He has an inflated sense of ego. He's ready to run into a fight at any moment. You know, he's the kind of friend you'd want with you in a bar fight, you know? Like when things pop off, you got to have that friend there who's like, "Ah!" You know? Peter says, I'd die for you. And then Jesus says to him, "What you don't understand, Peter, is that before the rooster crows, before the sun comes up this morning, you're going to deny me at least 3 times. We fast forward a few hours, and Jesus is hanging out with his disciples in this garden, and these Roman soldiers come to arrest him. And Peter, being who Peter is, it says in verse 10 that Simon Peter, who had a sword, drew it and struck the high priest's servant, cutting off his right ear. And Jesus commanded Peter, "Put that sword away. Am I not going to drink from the cup that my Father has for me?" And in that moment, Peter begins to feel lost. You ever feel lost? You ever been lost? You know, I'm a pretty active guy. I do like an hour of cardio every single day, an hour of weightlifting every single day. You'd think it would make a difference, but abs are made in the kitchen, people. I'm a kind of outdoorsy kind of guy. I like to go biking and hiking and camping. I like to think of myself as, you know, a manly man. And I was thinking of things that I could do with my son, Connor, who's 11, my oldest son. And I thought, Jennings State Forest is near my house. and it's got hiking trails, and part of it butts up to a neighborhood near my house, and I thought, well, we could probably start at the trailhead, and we could navigate our way through the trails and come out in the neighborhood near our house. So it's like 6 o'clock at night, and I grab Connor, and we head to the trailhead, and we start hiking. We get about 45, 50 minutes in, and I realize I have no idea where we're at. We double back, go left, go right, and then we end up in front of this house, this dilapidated house that looks like it's straight out of a horror movie like Blair Witch Project or Texas Chainsaw Massacre. But luckily enough, I also have an inflated sense of ego, and I had a pocket knife. And if there was a serial killer there, I was ready to take him on. But my 44 years of wisdom said, hey, why don't you just move along really quickly? So we started moving along. I grabbed my phone and checked my GPS to see where I was in relation to the neighborhood I was trying to go to. And then I realized my phone was at 3%. So with what I had left with my phone, I called my wife and I said, hey, honey, I'm in the middle of the forest with Connor. My phone's about to die and the sun's going down. If I'm not home by like 8, 9 o'clock, just send the cops here. This is my last location. Phone dies, but I got my trusted Apple Watch, which then alerts me it's about to die. So now I'm completely cut off from technology. And we're walking through the twilight, and Connor pulls this thing out of his pocket. I say, Connor, what's that? And he says, it's a compass. I said, why'd you bring a compass? And he said, well, Mom pulled me aside. And she said, there's a strong likelihood you're gonna get us lost. This might be helpful. That compass was no help, but we made it through the trails a little bit. I saw this, what seemed to be like a work dirt road that was up ahead, so and roads leads places, so we climbed through this barbed wire fence, got out to the dirt road, started walking up, and then we get about a mile up the road, this van comes over the hill doing like 60, kicking up dust. My wife Bonnie had pulled together a search and rescue crew of herself and our 3 other kids and found me in the middle of nowhere. But isn't that like life? Isn't that like life? We set out on this adventure with a destination in mind. You know, we're gonna land here, and a lot of times we get lost along the way. Maybe you're here today and you feel lost. Maybe in your marriage, your addiction, your business, your job, maybe in school, your parenting, your friendships, your love life, your purpose, your finances, maybe in your relationship with God. You know, I've been thinking about this. Like, how come we end up lost? We have this idea of where we're heading. We have a plan on how to get there, and then we end up lost along the way. How does that happen to us? And I came up with a few reasons. They're not all the reasons, but they're the reasons we're going to talk about today that apply to the few days of Peter's life that we're going to look at. And the first reason is, if you're writing down notes, you can write this down. It's unmet expectations. Unmet expectations, unsatisfied or unfulfilled expectations. You ever have unmet expectations? You just thought life would be different? You know, like let's say you woke up one morning, went to church, hoping to see your favorite preacher, and the B squad's up there. You're right there right now. Unmet expectations. I was talking to someone a few months ago, and they told me that they had heard that Element Conference was going to have a breakout session that was about sexuality. And they were upset about this because they wanted to be the person who talked to their kid about sexuality, not our youth leaders or whatever. And I said, you know what that makes me think? Should I be talking to my kid about this? I mean, Connor, my oldest, is 11 now. He's in youth. He's going to be at the conference. Is it time to have this conversation? Because they don't give you a book and say, at this age, on this date, you have this conversation. Here's the detailed outline of it. Like, that doesn't happen. So you're just kind of trying to figure it out as you go. So I start talking to some friends of mine, and I end up talking to a really good friend of mine, and I come to the conclusion that I'm going to find out what Connor knows. Like, what's his baseline understanding about it, and then I'll go from there. So I pick up Connor after youth one night. He gets in the car, and I'm like, hey, Connor. He says, hey, Dad. And I go, what you know about sex? And he looks at me, and he goes, did my friends tell you to talk to me? And I said, no, but now I want to know why your friends want me to talk to you about sex. And then he said, so you're telling me this is a coincidence? And I said, yes, it is, clearly. Now start talking, why your friends want me to talk to you. And so I guess earlier that day at youth, 2 of his friends approached him and said, hey, have your parents had the talk with you? And he said, what talk? And then they said, the talk. And then he said, can you give me like a clue of what the talk's about? And then I could tell you maybe if I had the talk. And then they said, well, you know what parents do at night? And he said, sleep. And they said, your parents need to have the talk with you. And I said, 1, I like your friends. They redirected you to me rather than spilling the beans with you, but you're not going to get this conversation until you tell me what you know about sex. So start talking. Turns out he didn't really know anything. I mean, he's a pretty innocent kid. And I went on about my business, but now I'd opened up Pandora's box. Because a couple days later, I walk upstairs and Bonnie goes, hey, Connor wants to have the talk with you. And I said, now? And she said, yeah. And I said, we haven't talked about the talk. Like, how do we talk? Like, do I read a book? Shouldn't I be prepared for this? I've never done this before. Do you want me to just wing it? And she said, yeah, wing it. So I sit down with Connor. And now in Connor's mind, he thinks that he's about to unlock the secrets of the universe, right? He's going to get secret information that parents have been hiding from children for hundreds of years. That's going to change the very direction of his life. So I sit down and I begin to tell him about the birds and the bees, and he's pretty disturbed by this. He can't imagine that anybody would want to do this. And I said, well, you like chocolate. It's way better than chocolate. At one point he goes, he's so convinced that nobody would do this. He goes, so this is how babies get made, Dad. And I go, yeah. And he goes, okay, so you get married, you don't want to have kids right away. So you wait like 2-3 years and then you go, okay, let's do this so that we can make a baby. And I said, nah, people do it right on their wedding day. Tons of them do it way before. And then he looked at me and he said, Dad, I regret having this conversation with you. He had unmet expectations. He expected to unlock the secrets of the universe, but instead, he was so disturbed and disgusted that he ended up going to play video games for the rest of the night just to try to forget that he ever dove into that information. Peter's in the same situation. Right? When Peter began to follow Jesus, he thought they were leading a revolution. The Jewish people at the time thought when the Messiah would come that he would lead a war. He would lead a violent revolution against their enemies and free the Jewish people from those oppressors. So that's how Peter saw himself. He saw himself as like a rebel leader, a freedom fighter who was going to beat back the Roman Empire with violence and force, that was going to free his people and set up a new nation state and put Jesus on the throne as the new king. And then Jesus tells him, put that sword away. At the perfect opportunity when the Romans are coming to arrest him and he's at the height of fame, Jesus, this is the time. This is the time. We'll raise up an army and we'll beat them back. And he tells him, put the sword away, and it disillusions him. He just doesn't understand, this isn't what I expected. This isn't how it's supposed to end. Maybe you thought it would be easier to get over that addiction. Your marriage wasn't what you thought it would be. The business didn't take off like you thought. You thought accumulating all these things would make you happy. Or when you got that degree, you'd get your dream job. Or that God would come through on your timeline. Or parenting would be less complicated. You have these unmet expectations. Unmet expectations, today's unmet expectations lead to tomorrow's trepidations. Today's unmet expectation leads to tomorrow's unreasonable fears. If you're taking notes, that's my second point. You can write that down. Unmet expectations lead to unreasonable fears, fears that's not guided by any base or good sense. Unreasonable fears that lead us to being lost along the way. I was walking to the pool with my kids about 2 months ago, and my oldest daughter, Rebecca, who's 8, said, "Dad, I want to go down the water slide today." And I said, "Honey, to go down the water slide, you got to know how to swim. You can't go in your puddle jumper or your floaties." And she said, "Dad, I've been telling Mom I need to learn how to swim. I'm too old for these." And I said, "Cool, let's teach you how to swim." Now, I've never taught anybody how to swim before. My oldest son learned on his own. I don't know if he had some classes or something. I guess he can swim. So, and I'm like, I winged it with the whole sex talk. So let's just wing the teaching you how to swim thing. So we head to the pool. We're sitting in 3 feet of water, and I'm holding her up, and she's kicking her feet and moving her hands. And a good friend of mine had told me that the first key is to get them to get used to putting their head underwater. So I say, "Okay, honey, just put your face in the water." And she's like, "No, Dad, I'm scared." And I'm like, "Just put your," and it's unreasonable for her to be afraid. She thinks she's gonna drown, but she can literally stand up and her head, half her body is out of the water. And her dad's right there, but she won't even dip her head in the water. And after 5 minutes of trying to encourage her and coach her, I just shove her head right down. Like a good dad. After some tears, and she was off to the races. She was ready to learn. And Johnny, my reckless, fearless 6-year-old, decided to join her, and it was really cool. It was the first time I ever had a glimpse of the tenacity and work ethic my kids might have, that they might just naturally have, because they wanted this. Every morning they'd wake up for the next couple weeks and they'd say, "Dad, can we go to the pool and train?" And we'd go to the pool, and they would just spend hours trying to swim from one side of the pool to the next, and back and forth and back and forth. And eventually, after a couple weeks, they were swimming good. They were already in the deep end. I felt comfortable with it. They were good to go. Now it's time to go down the water slide. So I say to Rebecca, "You ready to go down the water slide?" And she said, "I don't know, Dad, I'm scared." So I'm trying to give her some sort of incentive. So I say, "Becky, if you go down the water slide, if you can get up the courage and get over your fear, I'll give you $20. And she says, "I'll try, Dad." She walks up the stairs, looks at the water slide. No, walks right back down. She does this at least 20, 30 times. So then I say to her, "Hey, I'm gonna sit at the bottom of the water slide and I'll catch you. And that way you can feel perfectly safe. There's no way you're gonna drown." And she looked me dead in the eyes and she said, "Dad, when you taught me how to ride my bike, you told me you wouldn't let go. And then you did." And I said, "True. I wasn't going to catch you at the bottom of the water slide either." So I gave up on her, and I went to my 6-year-old, the wild man. He'll do anything. He's fearless. He's courageous, right? And if he thinks it's fun, if it's an adventure, he's for it. And I say, "Hey, buddy," and if he goes, maybe Rebecca will go. So I go, "Hey, I'll give you $20 if you go down the water slide." And he said, "Nope." I said, "How about 25? He said, "Not happening, Dad." 30? No way. So I give up on both of them. They're gonna have to live in their unreasonable fear. They're swimming in the deep end. I'm just hanging out by the pool, and a couple of friends show up at the pool, and we're talking about Johnny and how just crazy he is, how he would jump off a building if he thought it was fun. And I said, "Yeah, but this kid won't even go down the water slide. No matter what incentive I give him, I could offer him $1 million, and he won't go down the water slide." And I go, "Watch, Johnny, I'll give you $50 if you go down that water slide." And he looked at me, looked at the water slide, looked at me. "For $50, I'll do it." Yeah, he was holding out. He jumped up immediately, ran up, went right down the water slide, ran up to me, and he's like, "Dad, are you really gonna give me that $50? And I said, Johnny, melons are people of their word. I'm giving you $50. I may have to use your bed tonight because your mom is going to be mad that I got hustled by you. Unreasonable fear. Peter has unreasonable fear. We catch him after Jesus has been arrested. There's an immediate trial, and Peter is hiding in the crowd. At one point, just a few hours earlier, he was ready to die. In fact, he pulled out his sword, ready to go to war, and now he's hiding in the crowd, afraid that anybody would notice him. And it's a bit unreasonable. Some scholars say that there were some disciples that were up close in the trial, that they were next to Jesus, that the Romans were looking for Jesus. They weren't looking for his disciples. So he's hiding in the crowd, and he begins to not deny even knowing Jesus. He says in verse 17, someone says to him, "You aren't one of this man's disciples too, are you?" And he goes, I'm not. This courageous warrior, this fighter, turns into this coward, betraying any knowledge and any association to Jesus with his unreasonable fear. You know, fear defeats more people than any one thing on planet Earth. Fear defeats more people than any one thing on planet Earth. And that brings me to my third point. We get lost in life because we have unmet expectations that lead to unreasonable fear and to unfixable failure. Just no coming back from it. Unfixable failure. I always wanted to play football. And as a kid, I'm a big Vikings fan, which is just like a journey of, misery and disappointment. I'm from Minnesota, and the Vikings are bound to make it all the way to the championship game or the Super Bowl and then let you down. They're like the LeBron of football. They just can't win a championship. Anyways, I always wanted to play football as a kid. And for whatever reason, I couldn't. We didn't have the money or we didn't have the time. And then my senior year, I went out for the football team. Centennial Cougars, Cougar Pride till I die. And I made the team. I was pretty proud of myself that I made the team. I mean, everybody made the team, but I made the team. And my skill level landed me on the JV squad. For those who don't know what the JV squad means, it's basically the backup to the backup to the backup to the backup. They're so bad that they actually have separate games for those guys so that they can play a game. So it's the first JV game of the year. And we line up for the first play. The center hikes the ball to the quarterback. I'm the right offensive tackle. Steps back, touchdown. I'm excited, full of adrenaline. I look up. It's probably 20 seconds after the play, and their defensive tackle is pushing around our center. Or maybe I'm a lot like Peter. I'm impulsive and reckless and quick to run into a fight. And so I run up to that guy, and I pop him in the chest, and I'm like, if you're going to fight somebody, you fight me. Throw up his helmet a little bit. I start cussing him out because I wasn't a Christian at the time. Start making all sorts of threats, and the ref comes running in, and he's like, 65, you're out of here. And I look up, and the guy in front of me, his number is 65. So I said, 65, that's right, you're out of here. And the ref looks at me like I'm an idiot. And I look down, my number's 65. So I walk off the field, and they're like, oh, no. You need to go sit on the bus. I sit on the bus, and I meet with the athletic director the next day, and he said, for all intents and purposes, we should kick you off the team. And I begged him. I was like, come on, man. I've always wanted to play football. Just it's my senior year. Let me play. Let me just be on the team. And so he let me stay. I never played another play in my life. It was unfixable. Now, maybe that had more to do with my talent than it had to do with that incident, but either way, I didn't play another play in my life. We have these unfixable failures. Peter has an unfixable failure. In John 18:27, it says, again, Peter denied knowing Jesus. And in that moment, the rooster crowed. And immediately, I assume Peter is back at dinner, saying, "Oh, Jesus, I'd die for you. I'm your guy. You know me." And his heart probably sunk and got sick to his stomach as he realized, I failed him. I failed the person I love most in the world. I'm a coward. I betrayed him. And Jesus has been tried, convicted, and sentenced to death, and the revolution isn't happening. Man, it just doesn't seem fixable. I don't see any coming back from this. Maybe you're here today and you're not just afraid that your marriage is going to fall apart. It did. It ended in divorce. Or you're not fearful of the addiction that it's already consumed you. The business isn't just in trouble, it closed down. You failed out of school. God didn't come through. That loved one that you cared about died anyways. Maybe your kids won't even speak to you. It just doesn't seem fixable. There's no coming back from this. You know, a few months after the shutdown back in 2020, I was driving with my son, Connor. My son, Connor, is like the opposite of Johnny. So Johnny is the wild one. Connor is the conservative, thoughtful, caring one. He's brilliant as a kid. Like, I have to keep looking up on Google what the word he's using means. He, instead of saying brothers and sisters, he says siblings. He's just a kind kid, a hard worker. We're driving down the road, and he looks at me and he says, "Dad, do you hate us?" Referring to his brothers and sisters and himself. And I said, "Buddy, why would you think I hate you?" And he said, "You're angry a lot. You're impatient. When you're around, it doesn't feel like you want us around." I thought, man, I failed you, buddy. It wasn't too long ago we were sitting in a hospital and I was holding you in my arms. And I was hoping I wouldn't screw your life up. And now, it feels like it's too late. Like I missed my opportunity. Like it's unfixable. He's older now. He's 11. He's got his own life. He's got his own friends. He doesn't run to the door when I come home. Having a conversation with him sometimes can be like pulling teeth. Did I miss my window? Did I miss my shot at having a good relationship with my kid? Some would say failure isn't fatal, but failure to change can be. What do you do when you feel lost? Like, I think it's a natural, normal human thing to go back to what's familiar. When you feel lost in life, to just go back to what's familiar. You go back to that old relationship. You go back to that old addiction. You go back to that old job, that old town, that old thing. That's what Peter does. He goes back to fishing. That's where we catch up with him. And in John chapter 21, 1 through 17, Peter is out fishing. When Jesus first found Peter, Peter was a fisherman. That's what he did as a trade. And then Jesus calls him to be a revolutionary, and he goes on about that, and he has these unmet expectations that lead to unreasonable fears that come to unfixable failures and he says, screw it, I'm just going fishing. Go back to what I know. Jesus has been crucified, buried, and he's risen from the dead. He's appeared to some of the disciples at this point. And then he shows up on the beach while Peter's out there fishing. He calls him in. They have lunch together, and then he has this conversation with him. And there's a few things that I think we can learn from the conversation he has with Peter if we feel lost today. 3 things that we can learn from it. If you're taking notes, you can write this down. If you're feeling lost today, the first thing that you can do is choose to love God. Jesus says to Peter, he says, do you love me, Peter? Do you love me, Peter? Yeah, I love you, Lord. Do you love me, Peter? You can choose to love God. And maybe you're here today and you feel distant from God. You feel like God's distant from you. You've never even known what it's like to love God. Or maybe you're here today and you're angry at God. You blame him for the circumstances that you're in. He let you down. He didn't come through. I think in all those scenarios, you can still choose to love God. About 10 years ago, I was in a place in life where I was directionless and I felt lost. I didn't know where life was going to take me. I was reading this book called Prisoner of the Third Cell, and the author is writing about John the Baptist and how John the Baptist baptizes Jesus, and he's like, this is the king, this is the Messiah whose shoes I'm not even worthy to tie. He's so confident in who Jesus is and what he's on earth here to do. And then life goes on and pain happens. John ends up in prison. And now he starts questioning whether or not Jesus is the Messiah. He sends his disciples to go talk to him. John's disciples come up to Jesus and they say, hey, are you the Messiah? And he goes, go back to John and tell him the sick are being healed, the poor are being taken care of. And then he looks at the crowd that's there with him and he says, John the Baptist is the greatest of all time. He's the best of the best. There is no better prophet than John. He surpasses them all. And then he says this cryptic phrase. He says, blessed are those who don't hold it against me. And the author is like, why would Jesus say this? What's the point of saying this? And he theorizes. He talks about how, God himself is walking the earth. He's healing the sick. He's raising the dead, casting out demons. He's doing all this good. He's helping out the helpless. And his cousin, who's the greatest prophet of all time, is in prison, and he's going to die. And there's nothing he's going to do about it. Blessed are those who don't hold it against me. Don't hold it against me, John. You just don't understand. The author goes on to try to wrestle with why bad things happen to good people, but in the end, he comes to the conclusion that we can't really understand the mystical God. Blessed are those who don't hold it against me. You can either choose to love him or not. In the very last chapter, he poses this question to the reader. He says, will you follow a God you don't understand and that doesn't live up to your expectations? And I remember at this low time in my life, I laid back on the bed, my in-laws' bed in the basement where I was staying at the time, and I said, Lord, if this is all you have for me, I'll follow you for the rest of my life. It wasn't just a few days later that Pastor Tim called me up out of the blue and said, hey man, you want to move from Minnesota to Florida? I said, every day of my life. My life went in a whole different direction. You can choose to love God. There was 2 preachers rising in prominence in the 1940s. Both of them began to struggle with their faith on whether or not God was real, was the Bible real. Eventually, the one that people say was the better preacher became an atheist and left the ministry. And the other preacher eventually hit his knees and he said, God, I feel lost, but I'm just going to choose to love you. I'm just going to choose to follow you. preacher who became an atheist went off to obscurity, and the preacher who hit his knees went on to become the greatest evangelist of our generation, leading millions and millions of people to the Lord. So integrous that Washington, D.C. basically shut down for his funeral. A guy named Billy Graham, who actually led the guy who got me into ministry to the Lord. He had a personal impact on my life because he chose to love God. You can choose to love God. The second thing that we can pull from this conversation that Jesus is having with Peter is choose to love others. He says, Peter, do you love me? Then feed my sheep. Do you love me? Then care for my sheep. Do you love me? Then feed my sheep. Basically, he's saying to Peter, if you love me, then love others. If you love me, then love others. And some people might say that that's the foundation of what it means to be human. Do you ever wonder what it means in the Bible when it says that you are made in God's image? What does it mean to be made in God's image? God the Father, and in the eternal dance of self-sacrificial love for the Son, and the Son for the Spirit, and the Spirit for the Father, the triune God, in an eternal communal dance of self-sacrificial love, one unto himself, and you and I, created in God's image. We were created for self-sacrificial love. We were created to love God and others. That's what we were made for. Why are you so moved when you see self-sacrifice? When you hear the story of the firefighter who runs into the building to save the baby and loses his life at the same time? Why is that such a moving experience? Why is it so moving when you hear somebody who's willing to give up their comfort and their conveniences to serve those who can't serve themselves? Because it's a picture of what it means to be human. It's a glimpse. You're like, oh, I see it. That's what it's supposed to be like. That's how we're supposed to be. We can choose to love God and love others. And finally, take a step in a new direction. Take a step in a new direction. Jesus, at the end of the conversation, tells Peter once again, follow me. He told him that 3 years earlier. And when he did tell him that, Peter thought to himself that he was going to be a revolutionary. He was going to be this rebel fighter that was going to install a new king on the throne of the Jewish nation. But this time, Jesus had different plans. He was going to be a revolutionary, but it was a different kind of revolution. It wasn't a revolution of violence. It was a revolution of peace. It wasn't a power over revolution. It was a power under revolution. A revolution that ascribed the unsurpassable worth that people had in the eyes of God to every bit of humanity. A self-sacrificially loving revolution that served the least of the least and the lowest of the low, those who couldn't serve themselves. A revolution that would span the globe. Because sometimes, on the way to your hopes and dreams, you get lost and you find your destiny. So, start that new business. Ask that person out. Join that rehab program. Reach out to your kids. Get that degree. Take a step in a new direction. Switch careers. Maybe it's something simple, like jumping into a small group or onto a serve team. Going to explore to find out your purpose. Because we know in Romans 8:28, and we know that in all things, God works for the good of those who love him and are made for his purpose. What's his purpose? For you to love God and love others. Basically what he's saying is that we know that in all things, God works it for the good of those who love him and love others. So when you take this step in a new direction, God's gonna package up all this mess that you've been in, this journey that you've been on where you felt lost and broken and like it was unfixable and fearful of the failures that were ahead of you. And he's gonna package it all up and he's gonna use it for your good. You know, if I was being honest with you, I felt lost over the last couple of years. I do think I'm a lot like Peter. I'm driven and tenacious and reckless and impulsive. And when I was 26 years old, I felt like I found the greatest mission that any man could ever have, to help introduce people to the living God. And I dedicated my whole life to it, charging whatever hill came in front of me, doing everything I could to change people's lives, building and driving and working and thriving and striving. And then everything got shut down. It seemed like it all came to an end. I had these unmet expectations. I thought things were going to be different. And there was more pain ahead even. I was fearful that it would never be the same. There's no way to fix this. But I got good friends, people that challenged me to take steps in a new direction. So I became a lot more active, a lot less impulsive, and a lot more patient. A lot less angry and more joy-filled. More present in the moment and intentional about my relationships. And I guess I found a new purpose. Not that this purpose matters, and we're still doing it, but even more purpose. To create memories and moments with the people I love most in the world. That's what I do every day. Every day I wake up and I think, how can I have joyful, fun-filled, memory-making experiences with the people I love most? That's how I want to spend my day. And if I die at the end of the day, I died spending it with the people I care most in life about. And along the way, I got to be there for milestone moments in my kids' lives when they learn how to ride their bike or teach themselves how to swim or get grossed out about the birds and the bees. I was telling a friend of mine about this message, and I told him what Connor had said in the car, and his immediate reaction was like, "Whoo, bro, that's bad. Nobody wants to hear they're a bad dad." And then he said, "Do you think Connor still feels that way?" I said, "I don't know. I think I'm different. Life's different. I'll ask him." Connor got home that night from like a birthday party or something. And he opened up the bedroom door. And I said, "Hey, buddy, remember back when you said that you thought I hated you? You still feel that way?" And he said, "Nah, Dad. You love us. I know that." And I said, "What makes you think that?" And in this little kid way, he was like, "Well, Dad, you bring us to the movies. And you go hiking with us and biking. You take us to the pool. You're a lot more patient, way less angry. And it seems like you want us around. I mean, don't get me wrong, you still punish us every once in a while. But that's when we did something wrong. I guess it wasn't too late. Maybe it's not unfixable. Let's take a step in a new direction. Would you guys pray with me? Every head bowed, every eye closed. I believe there are people here who haven't ever had the opportunity to love God. Maybe you had a friend who dragged you here at one of our locations or here at Oakleaf. Or you've been exploring this whole Jesus thing for the last couple weeks and you want to know if it's worth it. I've never met a single person who chose to love God who decided that that was a bad idea. And in a moment, I want to give you the opportunity to step across that line of faith. And I believe when you step towards God, he comes running after you. And I also think that there's many, many of us here who love God, but we felt lost in some area of our life. And I want to give you an opportunity to hit the reset button and take a step in a new direction, to rededicate your love for God and your love for others and start journeying where God's calling you to go this time. Let's do this at all of our locations right here at Oakleaf. If you guys would repeat after me out loud. Dear Jesus, I give my life to you. Lord, teach me to love you and love others, and give me wisdom on my next steps. In Jesus' name, amen. Thank you, church.